Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Colangelo, Head of Marketing and Communications here at Epic. I'd like to welcome you to this month's edition of Epic Insights. Today, we're joined by Sue Kelley, Vice President and Retirement Account Manager for Federated Investors, who will be introducing us to Fiduciary Luminary, which is a program built by Federated. It gives advisors, consultants, and bank trust departments fast, accurate, and insightful information about managing their businesses as fiduciaries. Sue joined Federated from the retirement practice management consultancy firm Schleck & Company, where she was managing director in charge of institutional sales and client relationships. In her early years with Schleck & Company, she managed research, including syndicated and custom studies for retirement plan providers and investment companies. She also built and managed the proprietary database of retirement advisor practice management metrics that forms the foundation of the Schleck & Company's strategies and programs. And before I turn things over to Sue, a quick reminder that your line will be muted throughout the presentation, but if you have any questions, please submit them through the GoToWebinar questions panel on your screen, and we will address them at the end of the session. With that, I will turn it over to Sue. Sue, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris, for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to learn more about Federated's Fiduciary Luminary program. Before we get started and get into the details of it, I want to just give you a little bit of background. Federated Investors has been a world-class investment manager. We have been in existence since 1955 and for many, many years have built tools and materials and resources to help financial intermediaries and institutions. And our Executive Vice President and Corporate Counsel, Gene Maloney, has been supporting fiduciaries for decades. He has been doing fiduciary long before the topic has become a hot one. And Gene assembled a team of luminaries, if you will, who specialize in a variety of fiduciary topics. So, ERISA and trust law and fiduciary administration, regulatory, statutory, etc. And just a few, as we get into the details here, you certainly can look on the site. There was a whole team of people that worked on the Fiduciary Luminary program. A couple of them, Brad Campbell, many of you are familiar with. Brad, of course, was the former Assistant Secretary of Labor for Employee Benefits and head of the Employee Benefit Security Administration. So Brad certainly specializes in ERISA. And then Rob Sitkoff is the John L. Gray Professor of Law at Harvard Law School, and those were two key contributors. There were several other attorneys and specialists that you can read more about as well. As Chris mentioned, I joined Federated this year, so selfishly I am excited to be able to talk with you about this program because as a member of the Schleck & Co team with Federated as a client of ours, I got to work on this program. So I spent a good portion of 2016 working with this great Fiduciary Luminary team in putting together this program. So fun to be able to be on the other side now and sharing it with folks like you. And really the goal of the Fiduciary Luminary program was certainly the DOL rule, the conflict of interest rule raised a lot of fiduciary questions. And so we wanted to be able to address, some of those things. So obviously the notion of being a fiduciary became a much, hotter topic. And so we wanted to build something, though, that was really beyond just the DOL rule. So you'll notice as we get into things, we certainly touch on some of the questions and things related to the DOL fiduciary rule, but the Fiduciary Luminary program is much broader than that. There's a whole lot that goes beyond the DOL rule, and it's really meant to give you a great, basis and foundation for implementing a prudent process, as you work with your clients. So the goal as I mentioned, in working with these, really smart people with all this information was, how do we take all of this and make it really practical for advisors, for consultants, for broker-dealer home offices and bank trust departments? As you are sitting across the table and working with your clients, how can we take this great information and make it translated into a process and a practice so that you can implement this information? And that's really what we sought to do with Fiduciary Luminary. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, for those of you who are new to the fiduciary, new to acting as a fiduciary, I think you're going to find just a wealth of information and support around what to do, what to say, how to do it. Others of you may have been acting as fiduciaries, for many, many years, and you most likely have a process and procedures and things in place, but I think you'll even find things that you can augment what you're already doing. I've talked with advisors who have seen these resources, who have been acting as fiduciaries, and who have said, this is great, we can use this particular checklist or this form or something in place of what we're already doing, or to augment what we're already doing. So whether you're new to fiduciary or you've been acting as a fiduciary, I think there's something for everyone here. So with that, let me jump into it. What you're seeing in front of you is the home screen to Fiduciary Luminary. And just so you know, this does not require you to log into. You don't need a password or anything. You can just go out to fiduciaryluminary.com and you'll be directed to this home screen. And what I want to do is kind of lay out the three different program components, and then just dig in a little bit deeper into them so you get a sense of what is here and how to navigate best as you go on. So the first component is a question and answer database. And what we did was take these many, many questions with the associated answers and organize them in a method that you would use as you work with your clients. And I'll show you what that framework looks like in just a second. So within the answers to many of these questions, there's a tool or a checklist right there. You also can, print the answers, the question and the answer. If you want to print it or download it, you have the ability to do that as well. The second component is a series of fiduciary primer videos. And what we did was take, some core topics around what folks wanted to better understand around being a fiduciary, and kind of interviewed Jean and Brad and Rob in these videos to cover the answers to those various questions. And we'll take a look at those as well. And then the third component is what we call Bright Ideas Client Guides. And what we did, there's two of them available. A third one is in the works that should be available by year end. We'll take a closer look at what is in these, but it basically packages up kind of the whole process. So for example, around prospecting, what are the steps that you should take? What should you say? And what should you document as a good fiduciary? And so you can get access to those as well. So those are basically the three program components of the Fiduciary Luminary program. So now we're going to take a look at the, I mentioned to you the question and answers and the Bright Idea Guides are organized in stages in how you would work with your clients. So for example, first of all, you'd be prospecting for new business. And, there's a series of steps that you would take as you're prospecting. The second stage is implementing investment goals and strategies. So determining what your client's investment goals are and then what the strategies are. The third is monitoring, monitoring the investments and reviewing them and then documenting and fourth is managing account changes. So we organized the questions around those various topics. Now the first section of questions is just some basic fiduciary questions, and I want to just give you a kind of an example as to what these look like. So a real basic question is, am I a fiduciary? So I mentioned to you that when you get to the answers, anything is printable and downloadable. And then within the answers to many of the questions, there might be a tool or a checklist. So we explain, what does it mean to be a fiduciary? But then we'll also provide a decision tree, starting with, did you make an investment recommendation? Well, no, then you're not a fiduciary. If yes, you're going to go through a series of questions that help you determine if you are considered a fiduciary or not. So kind of a basic example of some of the tools that are built right into this. The next category is the prospecting one. And, one of the questions that we've gotten certainly is, how do I explain my service model and scope of services to a prospect? So we start off, of course, by going through the steps with, you want to explain to your client the different types of service models that there are, the brokerage model, the fee-based model. You're defining the different investment decision-making levels that you can provide as a fiduciary advisor, whether it's discretionary or non-fiduciary services. And then I want to show you just some of the tools built in. You can use, this is a scope of services worksheet that can help you define with your client. And noticeable, these are editable. You can type right in the dates, the client name, but you can determine in discussion with your client the types of services that you're going to offer to them and the frequency. And I do want to mention many of the tools that are contained within the Fiduciary Luminary site are built with the individual, wealth advisor who's meeting with individual clients in mind. Some of you do both retirement plan business, certainly, as well as meet with individual clients. And I do think for those who work only with plans, there are things, in being a fiduciary and the process that you can certainly use on the plan side of the business as well. There might be some tweaks that you make to questions, et cetera. But much of the process is already all laid out for you. So I think you can find great value as well too. So there's a scope of services tool to help you. And then in step 4, preparing for that prospect meeting. So you might use the scope of services tool, in a conversation where you're collecting information. Maybe it's a phone call if you don't have an opportunity to meet first with the prospect to discuss those things. But I want to show you too, what we've also created here is some actual, a presentation for you to use in a meeting with a potential prospect. So, we show a spot for the advisor logo. You can get access, to these slides. You can put them in, we've tried to use a neutral brand, but you can certainly put them in your own look and feel. This just shows you kind of what that looks like, starting off with the agenda. And a little sidebar comment here. I've looked at a lot of pitch books over the years, and I highly encourage making the presentation about the prospect as much as possible. So you can see in here we talk about the prospect's financial goals and their time horizon, and making it as much as you can about the prospect. So many pitch books that we see and that I've seen over the years are all about capabilities, and this is what we do, and us and our team, and blah blah blah. And what happens is you become kind of in the sea of sameness with everyone else. So the more that you can gauge your presentation to the needs, understanding the needs of your prospect and the process that you go through and how you work with them that way, the better off you'll be. You certainly can show the team and your mission, guiding values, and of course here's a series of questions that get at, you better understanding their needs. And again, some of these can be certainly repurposed, for the plan side as well too. A fiduciary calendar, what you're going to do and the frequency that you're going to do it, so they better understand your service delivery, and a summary of your services that you deliver, how your fees work. We all know the importance of being, disclosing and presenting fees, being upfront about that, but then also helping the client understand factors that drive fees. What makes things not only on the fund side, but in the services that you deliver can make things variable in terms of the fees that you're charging. And then next steps. So just another tool to kind of help you in that that prospecting, process. Another one I wanted to show you was, what sales process should I follow with prospects? So we talk about in the answer here, your prospect's going to want to know you have a prudent process, you act with integrity, you don't have conflicts, your fees are reasonable. And then we lay out the prudent sales process. So what are all those steps in doing that? And then we've got a prospect profile form for you, so helping you, and I'm sure many of you already use something like this, where you're collecting as much information as you can about that prospect to really set up, the best service arrangement and tailor your services to what their needs are. So we have a sample of that in there too. And what we tried to do is, we've got the scope of services worksheet again here too. You'll see these duplicated where it makes sense, based on the question. So just a few points there in terms of prospecting. Then in the implementing category, got a lot of questions on that. But one of the questions I think is kind of good to look at is, how do I document an initial and ongoing review of a client's investments? And so we've laid out the investment information that you should be collecting, but again, in the spirit of making sure that things are documented, which we all know as fiduciaries, that's so critical to the whole process. We've got a prudent investor checklist for you, and this helps you not only make sure you're dotting I's and crossing T's as you work with your clients and prospects, but it also memorializes it for you in the file. So you've got, a spot for the client and the date and, who was part of the discussion and all the steps in terms of the investment process and the investment policy, the diversification and the decisions that you're making around that. And boom, you can put notes on it and check that it's been discussed and have it all there for the file. So again, back to the goal of taking these processes and making them, putting them in a manner that's going to help you actually implement it within your practice. Another question in the implementation category is, how do I execute an investment advisory agreement with an individual account? And what I wanted to show you here is, there are actually examples that you can download of, there's 2 for ERISA and 2 for non-ERISA, and whether or not it's a discretionary investment agreement or a non-discretionary. So I'm just going to open up the discretionary for the ERISA, and you can see we've got a 6-page sample of an advisory agreement that is a template for you to be able to follow. So. All right, and the last question in this category that I wanted to show you, and you can certainly see there's a lot of information here in terms of questions. It allows you to jump around, based on the various category that you want to flesh out. The question is around, for new clients, what process should I follow to open a new account? So we've laid out 9 steps. that take you right through establishing their risk, and I'm sure you have processes like this in place. But then we've got a new account opening checklist. Again, allows you to document all those steps that you've taken with the client as you're opening that new account, and add that right to the fiduciary file. So the next category is monitoring, handful of questions, and if you're paying attention at all as we move across this, our buildings are getting lighter. The design people are amazing when it comes to illuminating fiduciary questions is really what the goal around this is. So we've got a handful of questions in that monitoring, one of which is, how should an advisor conduct an investment review? And so we talk about the different levels of pre-acceptance review, post-acceptance, and then an annual review. And we've got an investment review policy template. So it talks about the two types of analysis review, and during each of those, here's the investment information that should be covered, and what your records should show. So again, kind of keeping you in check with what's important there. And then finally, with the Q&As around managing account changes, for those of you who are involved with rollovers, how do I communicate with clients regarding a plan rollover? And so, we talk about potential issues that you might have to address, and what the duty is to gather, key information that you need to evaluate whether or not rollovers are a prudent recommendation. And then we actually have samples of, here are the 4 categories that are not considered investment recommendations. So kind of a look at what would not fall into an investment recommendation if you were trying to, avoid that fiduciary status. So a couple tools there as part of the managing account changes. So that is, as I mentioned, the Q&A database, which was component 1 of it. I want to take a quick look and just overview for you the videos, the fiduciary videos. So we actually have, there's 6 videos. The first one is just kind of what I've already explained to you here now, what the program is about, who are the contributors to it, etc. You also can find out more information about the contributors in the About Us section on the website. But the 5 remaining videos are, one covers, and the videos range anywhere from 7 to 11 or so minutes. Tried to keep them kind of condensed, and they're in kind of an interview panelist sort of format. I'm going to show you a really short clip from one of them that I think is interesting. But the first one is, what makes you a fiduciary? So who are fiduciaries? How do you become one? Can you avoid fiduciary status? The next one is, what are the duties of a fiduciary, and what constitute a breach of fiduciary duties, and how can you protect yourself or limit your exposure as a fiduciary? The third one then is about the fiduciary investment process. So it goes through process and the discussion of documentation being critical, and responsibilities around diversification, and formalizing an IPS. So there's a lot of great information in that video. And then the fourth one is about the best interest contract exemption. So what is BIC? How and when should it be used? And then finally, this one covers IRA rollovers. So how the rule affects new and existing clients, how do you make a prudent recommendation regarding a rollover, and what are the factors that you need to evaluate when making a recommendation on the rollover. And I want to just give you a quick sample of that.
For the exemptions you need to use. So I mentioned before that there's an obligation now on the advisor to gather the information they need to determine whether a rollover is in the best interest of this person. And there are several different, there's a variety of factors people will use to take into account, but some of the key ones that would need to be considered are, what are the investments available in the plan the participant is rolling from relative to the ones in the IRA you're recommending they roll into? What are the investment expenses and fees? Some others that are going to be important are things like what are the services that are provided in the plan versus the IRA. For example, is there individualized investment advice available in the plan, which presumably would be in the IRA? If the participant, for example, needs to begin taking monthly distributions, such someone is at retirement age or using the plan for that, does the plan actually allow that? Many plans have only lump sum distributions or charge a fairly high monthly fee for distribution. IRAs typically don't, so that can be a relevant factor to a participant's situation, whether that IRA makes sense. You have to take into account the needs of the investor as well in working that out. So, for example, are there investments available that provide for retirement income or guarantees or other things that may not be available in the plan? You can add a lot more factors, but those are some of the core ones that need to be considered to determine whether.
So that just gives you a little sense of kind of how those videos are structured and what format, and there's a lot of great information in those. And then finally, the very last component is the Bright Ideas client guides that I mentioned. And these are available. I had mentioned before, we have 2 that are available now. One covers prospecting for new business. The second one is implementing investment goals and strategies. And we have one coming hopefully by year end that will be managing client account changes. And what they do is really package up those tools and the steps and all in one place help you with what to say, the steps to take, and what to document. And they're, when you're prospecting or when you're going through the, investment goals and strategies process. And so you can request them. This is the place that you would request them on the website. And you will be required here to fill in your information because these are sent to you electronically. And just to show you a little bit more on, I want to go back to that fiduciary framework that we had to show you specifically in that prospecting for new business guide. It's going to lay out the steps, profiling the prospect, determining your services, determining your fees, preparing for your meetings, sending meeting materials, conducting that prospect meeting and documenting, and then those tools that we talked about to help you do that. The same for the investment goals and strategies, reviewing the asset info, identifying the goals, setting the risk parameters, et cetera, and all of the tools. So these are packaged up in those Bright Ideas client guides. The last thing that I wanted to mention is you do have an opportunity, and we'd love to hear from you in the Suggest a Topic up in the right-hand side. So if there's something that we haven't covered in the Fiduciary Luminary program or something that you want to dig deeper on or whatever, you have an opportunity to send us what that topic is or your question and let us know so that we can look at potentially addressing it, within the website. Again, it's fiduciaryluminary.com, and you can access it, as I mentioned, without having any sort of passcode. It's if you do want to, order those guides, you will need to provide your contact info. But with that, I am going to see if we have any questions, Chris.
Sure, Sue. I have a couple that I'll paraphrase quickly for you. Are there any fiduciary topics that should be covered when pitching to a new prospect that you would sort of recommend, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me show you in the prospecting section here. We have a question that addresses what those topics are. So I guess it was interesting because as I thought about, you know, pitching to prospects, I don't think the notion of that there's a fiduciary overlay on top of that wasn't top of mind for me as we were working on this. And so what we did was create, you know, within this a sample meeting agenda for you. Again, fillable, but providing the agenda for a prospect so they know. I just think agendas in any meetings are so important so the person knows exactly what the expectations are for that. So introduction and background, notice it's your financial goals, our process, services that we offer, fees, you know, next steps. So this is a good way to set you up for that. And then we also have a checklist that this does not mean that you would cover necessarily everything in here, but you could use, if you had an opportunity to, you know, have a discussion with the prospect beforehand, you could use this to help you organize what you're going to cover based on what you know about that prospect in your meeting. So different kind of organizes you for as you're putting your materials together. So I think that's a good framework for that, Chris.
Great. And you may have covered, but is there any sort of approval needed to use any of the tools?
Yeah, really good question. So it's important that, you know, if you are affiliated with a broker-dealer that you are getting approval. We have not gone out, you know, to get approval for all the BDs out there, obviously, et cetera. So I really want to encourage you to ensure that if there are particular tools within here, you know, especially the agreements or really anything, that you need to run that through your compliance. Don't assume that it has been, you know, pre-approved. We actually built this and modeled it through a broker-dealer and actually have brought this whole program to the DOL and are kind of waiting for they were so impressed with the materials in here and felt like it really was representative of a great fiduciary process that they were kind of waiting to get the seal of approval, if you will, on this. But yes, definitely go to and get the approval from your compliance with your broker-dealer on any of these materials.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sue. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope to see you on a future installment of Epic Insights. Have a great afternoon.